back to the situation of Burkina Faso and ECOWAS. On Friday last week, just 5 days after the coup occurred in Ouagadougou, the capital city of Burkina Faso, the West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, met at a head of state level and decided to send 2 missions on the ground. So the very first decision, in fact, was to suspend Burkina Faso from the political bodies of ECOWAS, which is the very minimum move that the West African bloc could have made. So the purpose of this suspension is essentially to make sure that a country which is currently in breach from democratic norms does not get a say in the upcoming decisions of the ECOWAS. Now, on top of that, the ECOWAS also decided, as you mentioned, to send 2 missions to Burkina Faso. The first one was there on Saturday and mainly composed of the military chief of staffs of various ECOWAS countries, with the purpose of meeting with the new junta, but also taking stock at the security situation on the ground, probably to see whether ECOWAS could, beyond sanctions or condemnations, also offer some kind of actual support in curbing the insecurity that's affecting the country. Now, the second mission, which is expected in Ouagadougou today as we speak, will be composed of ministers of foreign affairs from various countries, with the purpose of trying to figure out exactly what the way forward in terms of putting together a transition could be and how things are going to unfold. So we will likely know more after this mission and after the next meeting of the ECOWAS head of states, which is scheduled in 3 days now, on Thursday this week.
So, in terms of the suspension of Burkina Faso from ECOWAS, what are the implications thereof in terms of, seeing and carving a path towards restoration of democracy in Burkina Faso? Does it, in your view and from previous experience, does it harden the positions of a military junta whenever one takes over, or is it a necessary pressure point before the negotiations can actually get underway in trying to steer a country back to normalcy?
Well, I would argue that it's neither one nor the other. What the suspension does really is that, it acts as a mainly political and somewhat symbolic gesture. This is the very minimum that ECOWAS could have done to maintain some kind of consistency with its own norms, but at the same time, this has very limited impact. It essentially means that Burkina Faso will not get to continue holding political office within the ECOWAS, and that the country will not get a say in upcoming discussions and decision making. On top, beyond that, we have never really seen that kind of sanction leading to the reversal of a coup. And in this particular context, one thing to keep in mind is that there is quite a significant popular support to what's happening. So although it is a breach of the normal democratic process, it's also, in a way, a revealing factor of everything that has been going wrong in the governance. So not just in, the procedural democracy, but in the way that public policy is conducted, whether or not it's responsive to public needs and demands. There have also been recurring issues of corruption, nepotism at stake. So these all are part of the broader framework for democracy that needs to be rethought in the context of Burkina, but also in other West African countries, such as Mali and Guinea, for instance.
And lastly, Ornella, before I let you go, you mentioned that there's going to be a meeting at heads of state level. Is that happening a bit later on in the week? And how high are the stakes here for ECOWAS in the context in which we've had, at least 4 coups in the West African Sahel region in the last 18 months or so, including where you are in Bamako in Mali?
Absolutely. So, You're totally right to mention that the stakes are high, not just for the various countries in crisis, but for the Ecowas itself. As a regional bloc, Ecowas has been facing a crisis of credibility and legitimacy over a number of things. So the main element, I think, is that at a regional level, the bloc has been seen as promoting a double standard approach to democracy and good governance. So on the one hand, being quite heavy-handed against countries that resort to military coups, but on the other hand, being quite complacent towards countries where incumbents essentially manipulate the constitution in order to maintain themselves in power for third terms or even more than third terms. I mean, we have some countries in the region where we have had the same political leadership for 4 or even 5 terms as we speak. So this is seen as a double standard that decredibilizes ECOWAS to quite some extent. On top of that, the recent adoption of fairly severe sanctions against Mali at the beginning of January also backfired to some extent. It created a movement of popular support, not just within the Malian nation, but also across the region to what is perceived as military coups aimed at correcting the trajectory of inefficient and corrupt democracy. So not to justify coups, of course, but there is a need, I think, to see beyond the initial shock of the coup itself and ask ourselves the right questions in terms of what this means regarding the need to rethink and to redesign the democratic process in this part of the world.
All right, Ornella, I've got to thank you for your time, Ornella Moderan there. And I do hope we will talk a bit more in the coming weeks or so, because we didn't even get to talk about the security situation and the implications thereof in terms of security of various countries in the West African region. That's Ornella Moderan there, who is a researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, talking to us from Bamako in Mali.